Through his sketches of all kinds of wildlife in the New World, Mark Catesby helped gather information about the wildlife and brought it back to the Old World and helped people understand the significance of some of the amazing creatures found in the Americas. Catesby's life was very interesting because he completed many remarkable things, including being one of the first English naturalists to accurately document the plants, wildlife, and the ocean life in the Americas. In Catesby's life, he went to the New World from England on an expedition to find wildlife such as fish, plants, and more. He went to modern-day South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Virginia, and the Bahama Islands. He was one of the few early naturalists to have left so many substantial and unique prints as well as journals for future historians to learn about. His journals and prints are a main part of some of the first scientific findings in the New World. According to C.W. Bardsley's Dictionary of English and Welch's Summers, the Catesby family is from the fertile inland country of Northampton. The exact date of Catesby's birth was never recorded, so we cannot know for sure. It was recorded that he never went to college, but he was still significantly educated in writing English and Latin due to his book. According to multiple sources, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum, he was born in Essex, England, in around 1682. Other than that, little is known about his early life. However, most historians can agree that he went to grammar school near the English town of Sudbury. After this, he spent a good portion of his young manhood in London. Then in 1712, he went to visit his sister in Virginia and fell in love with the wildlife and knew he wanted to conduct studies here. Catesby returned to England from his visit to the Americas in 1719. When he returned, naturalists were very stunned by his findings and wanted him to return as soon as possible. So in 1722, he returned to the Americas and studied southern areas of Americas like South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and even parts of the Bahamas. Catesby's journey to the New World was very intimidating because of the lack of information about the voyage over the Atlantic. Also, the task set on him by the naturalists back in England was nerve-wracking because they had so much hope that he would find new wildlife. The thought of him disappointing the naturalists was always in the back of his head until he returned to them a few years later. According to PBS Learning, when Catesby was a young man, he set sail for Virginia from England in 1712 to visit his sister. After a 7-year stay, he was astonished by the wildlife and plants, and he fell in love with being a naturalist. So when he returned to England with his paintings of animals, plants, and also fish, other naturalists were amazed and started to sponsor his next expedition. Catesby spent most of his middle life in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina conducting his studies. According to the Smithsonian Art Museum, after his visit to his sisters, he spent the next 7 years doing sketches and collecting plants and reporting them back to England. Mark Catesby's work in Virginia drew the attention of multiple members of the Royal Society. They helped sponsor Catesby's trip to the Americas 3 years later. From this point, he arrived in Charleston, South Carolina. He stayed in the Americas for 4 years this trip. During those 4 years, he bounced around the country from South Carolina, coast to Georgia, and even the Bahamas. Catesby studied multiple different species of fish and animals while he was on his second sponsored trip to the Southern Americas. He wrote and drew pictures about his findings and reported them to naturalists from England. His findings were spread throughout the scientific community in England for years to come, and even some still today. Without him, we would not know near as much as we did. This time in his life was the time of his life that he accomplished the most, the middle life. For example, this was the time of his life is when he would travel through the Carolinas and Bahamas, documenting and reporting them back to England. He also got sponsored by English investors. In 1726, Catesby returned to England for the final time. He would spend the next 2 decades working very hard on his fully illustrated version of the study, Natural History. Catesby became extremely well known in his later life after his publication of Natural History of the Carolina, Florida, and Bahama Islands. His publication remained the most used and in-depth collection of scientific illustrations for nearly a century. When Catesby returned to England, he was applauded and publicized by lots of people wanting to learn about the Americas. Catesby spent the rest of his life studying and working on documents and pictures from his 2 adventures to the Americas. According to Mark Catesby Sontra, as a scientist, he was one of the first to observe and recognize the natural and man-made dangers impacting species survival. As an artist, his paintings and etchings of birds, other animals, including fish and plants, captured the diverse natural beauty of colonial America a century before abundance. Our purpose in creating this documentary is because we were interested in wildlife in the state of South Carolina, particularly ocean life. We all love to fish. When we heard about Catesby, we knew he was the perfect topic for us. He not only documented wildlife in South Carolina, he was also one of the first to do it. We also were really interested in sport because we also know a lot about fish that he was documenting. Mark Catesby had to communicate his findings to England after his stay in the Americas was up. If he kept his findings to himself, no one would ever know all of the amazing plant, animal, and fish life that was in the Americas. He had to use his artistic abilities to communicate different plants, fish, and animals to the English people. The purpose of studying Mark Catesby's adventure to the New World is to promote and make sure his findings are appreciated. We also wanted to showcase that a lot of Catesby's documents and findings are used today in the studies of the New World. Some other interesting information that we found is that there's no evidence that really suggests that Mark Catesby was ever in North Carolina, but he pictured and described plants, animals, and reptiles and insects that were found there. These are all species that were typically found in North Carolina time period. So that suggests that some species that he found might have migrated over time.